going to take the assumption that we've caught all the potential stragglers for our webinar today, or at least hopefully we have, and we're going to go ahead and dive right in. So, as I said, this will be a Creo Schematics webinar presented by myself, Sean Farringer, on behalf of PDS Vision. I'll note, and again, we'll see that moving forward, formerly Boundary Systems. Our objective today is we're going to review and demonstrate some Creo Schematic stuff. We'll have a brief introduction here. We'll talk briefly about an exclusive PDS Vision concept of digital thread. We'll have a little overview, just of some Creo Schematic stuff. We'll go into some live demo. We'll get the Creo Schematics fired up, and we'll take a poke around and talk about some stuff in the software. And we'll close that off with a Q&A session to include contact information for everything, or excuse me, all the important, sales and technical and the YouTube channel, all that stuff for PDS Vision. We'll have all that up on the slides during the question and answer, so everybody can snag screenshots or, snag information if they need to or wish to follow up. So that's kind of like our basic workflow here, and we'll kind of dive right into that. So a little bit about me as we get started. Very little about me, if you will, because I'm probably the least important part of our topic and discussion today. Creo user since 2001. I'm a manufacturing-focused individual, if you will, in the PTC ecosystem. That is the bulk of my focus, but not exclusively. I have been a PTC certified trainer since 2007. In a host of different parts of the software, if you will, whether that relates to, the large assembly side of things and surfacing and whatnot, or mold, or NC, or schematics, or cabling, if you will, are topics for today. So, PDS Vision, formerly Boundary Systems. Everything and then some, so it's like Boundary plus, if you will, that existed, that was Boundary Systems, exists now, of course. Remaining PDS Vision, obviously, remaining the technology leader, first PTC global reseller and preferred services provider, software solution developer for design and manufacturing. We have a full suite of capabilities at PDS Vision, consulting, implementation services, professional training, cloud, help desk, etc. And arguably, as you can see from the image on your screen, having a global footprint now. A little bit more about the timeline of all these things, Boundary Systems, PDS Vision, this transition, how these things went, timeline of the company, and, showing the depth in history and experience, and obviously knowledge by extension that the PDS Vision, formerly Boundary Systems Group, brings to bear, shown here on this timeline. Some strategic partners that PDS Vision works with to supply clients with best-in-class solutions for the software applications they need and the workflows for their users. Are all shown here, PTC being head of the list, if you will, and obviously being our partner of discussion today. Tacton, Moldex 3D, Keyshot, etc. The PDS Vision Group strives, regardless of need, to have the appropriate application software solutions for those needs. The digital thread concept, exclusive to PDS Vision. The digital thread concept allows a company to see into the connectivity across their organization for the different products and in what groups these products reside, speaking somewhat holistically to those groups of products and their associates, for a very good description, I guess, if you will, as we see intergroup of product virtualization, process virtualization, digital manufacturing, and connected. These different rings have different concepts and associates with them. And they blend and work and interact with other parts of the ecosystem provided by PDS Vision to do these different things that are, in fact, needs that clients have. A looking at the digital thread concept by department in terms of concept and how the digital thread approaches speaking to different departments within a company. We see here as we have the layouts, the digital thread is very much representative of information flowing through the entire company and the association of the rings with respect to that information and how that information can be utilized by different rings moving both in and out in the sphere of rings, if you will. We'll speak to that concept very much today in the context of schematics, being able to share information with the Creo Parametric cabling product, speaking to the digital thread, that is the EE side of engineering and design, if you will, that typically threads, to use the term, into the context of physical cabling operations, if you will, in many 3D designs. So digital thread is a part of all things in the ecosystem, and PDS Vision is uniquely capable to speak to that. Okay, so a little bit about Creo Schematics, what we're going to talk about today, and just some basic background before we start actually looking at some concepts of these things inside of the software. So Creo Schematics falls under the CAD group in the theory of digital thread. It's very central and very focused as it speaks to the beginnings of the actual digital creation in terms of engineering content that would theoretically become physical product. Schematics provides a 2D environment for users to create and manage schematic designs for both pipe and electrical designs. There's functionality here to speak to both those types of schematic designs. Provides a basic library of artifact design templates. We'll kind of take a peek at where that lives today inside of schematics, and kind of see, at least from an overarching sense, a little bit of what's there. It's too much to look at in a holistic sense, but arguably that does speak to this, at least on the electrical side, is that there is an enormous depth of electrical schematic content, arguably being created daily in the world we live in now. So while the libraries are a baseline for folks to get going and stuff on, it is typical that companies are doing unique and advanced things that may be more so current than what may reside in PPC's library. But we're definitely going to take a look at what is there in the schematics library and stuff to that effect and where that lives. We do get a lot of interest and a lot of questions surrounding that. We'll talk about how schematics logical data can be shared with Creo Parametric to expedite Creo cabling workflows. So a part of the digital thread theory, as I mentioned, is speaking to the context of saying, hey, we have this data in one part of the digital thread, or one aspect or associate of the digital thread, node, if you will, and we're going to go ahead and share that off to another part of the digital thread. That speaks to the context, as I mentioned, of, hey, we're going to take logical data out of schematics and we're going to punch that over onto the Creo cabling side and see how that potentially benefits us there. Schematics allows users to create custom artifacts for all artifact design types. And that speaks to, both not only the listing of what I'm listing here on the slide saying, hey, we can do these different types of artifacts, but it speaks back, if you will, to the context of saying, hey, it provides a basic library with the understanding that, hey, these things are advancing daily, and this is part of what companies are doing, is taking advantage of new electrical devices and technology that are being created, at a very rapid rate in the day we live in now. So it's arguably important that, we be able to, kind of handle that in schematics and be able to build out those artifacts and maintain things that are near and dear that we may be utilizing in a design that are very much cutting edge or forefront, if you will, in terms of their definition. So schematics allows for a host of different types of designs to be created. Not everybody uses all types of designs at the end of the day. Wiring, circuit, P, IND, B, ID, and WID documents are all supported. To just share professionally, I would say that in my professional experience in working with clients in the schematic product and as well as cabling side for years now. The bulk of what I see people taking advantage of definitely resides in primarily the wiring and or by extension to some degree the circuit side of the functionality. There are definitely users, using it on the piping side as far as that goes. I'm not personally a party to like counts and stuff as far as that goes. But when I speak to that, I mean when we speak about the differences in wiring and circuit diagrams or designs, if you will, and something along the lines of more formal block interconnect and wire interconnect staged and more formally, incrementally documented processes. Not all companies are utilizing those more formally, incrementally documented processes, if you will, of BI&D documents or WI&D documents, subsequently downflowing in the digital thread inside of schematics to a wiring or circuit diagram. Moral of the story. You don't have to have those formal document types to take advantage of utilizing schematics functionality. You can use it straight away in a wiring or a circuit types diagram format. It's not madly important that we have a block interconnect diagram or, for instance, a wire interconnect diagram to be able to complete those other wiring or circuit processes. So it speaks to the overarching flexibility that is the schematics product, that it can fit into different companies wanting to work different ways. Some folks have a very explicit, very rigid, very thorough, shall we politely say, type of environment and workflow where all of those different stages of documentation and creation in the design on the EE pipeline are being done and provided. Things like BI&D and WID documents and things to that effect. So just know that while we speak to that and those are a part of schematics, they aren't on the face of it a requirement necessarily for you to take an enormous advantage of the product. For instance, as we segue off of this slide, and I will bring this slide back up as we go towards the end of our presentation. This is where we will, this is where we'll segue into the Creo schematic stuff. So here we have a very basic Creo schematic that we're going to discuss and work with today. And we're also looking at the Creo schematics basic user interface now. We've just opened up a very basic design here inside of Creo Schematics. It's not intended to be functional in any way. It's intended to be very simple by design and create something we can discuss the most simplest of concepts in schematics and functionality as it relates to Creo without layering in the unfortunate complexities that most folks deal with on a day-to-day basis. The schematic product's arguably well apt to handle all that. It just doesn't play well in a webinar. So we use some very simple stuff, and that helps us speak to kind of looking at these things and seeing it clearly for what it is. So what do we have on the screen right now in this context is a very basic schematics wiring diagram, if you will, representation of that. We're going to talk about some important parts of schematics here quick first, and then we'll talk about what these things are in the picture. So when we talk about schematics from a user interface and like an overarching standpoint, we've got a diagramming tab where most of the business takes place. We'll talk about this we'll kind of loop back around to this, if you will. Of course, we have a geometry tab. This is the stuff of 2D stick people creation type stuff, so that we can go ahead and create these types of artifact or shapes, if you will. It's referred to as an artifact here inside of our schematic designs. So we use this geometry tab to go ahead and create these things. To be clear, yes, it is possible to bring these types of 2D shapes and structures from otherwise AutoCAD DXFs and DWGs and those more formal prehistoric structures, if you will. They can definitely be used to bring them into Creo Schematics and automate some applications of custom things that you may have going on in some legacy product or something to that effect. But just know, it's basic stuff that resembles in a similar way Creo Sketcher on the parametric side and arguably a little bit of sketch basic outline drawing functionality, draft functionality, if you will, theory from the Creo Parametric side. It does kind of emulate the basis and context as far as the abilities and the techniques and the functions that we have here, arcs and fillets and stuff, if you will, to go ahead and facilitate creating these shapes, as I mentioned. We'll be talking about here very soon how the shape comes to life, if you will, in a meaningful way to live beyond the schematic. But just know that this is that basic interface that covers everything you need to, kind of go ahead and create those things. We also have, some stuff to control text and, how things look on the schematic. The appearance of text and features and things on the schematic historically is terribly important to everybody. There's a culture that develops in companies around these things and how the expectation will look for the delivery, the deliverable. So, we have to be able to manipulate a lot of text and a lot of appearance functionality and things to that effect. So we have some functionality exclusive for that purpose. We have the ability to control it further here through our properties tab as it relates to specific items, as you see here, by my selecting this W01 fiber that I have on the screen now. You see it highlighted in green. On our data tab, we have some basics that work between doing some high-level operations between our block interconnect and our wire interconnect diagrams, as you see here, to facilitate the checking between those staged processes, if you will, as information is shared down internally inside the schematic design from the BID or the WID, respectfully. Tools tab kind of provides some basic grid control and different functionality like that. I do have the grid turned off to enhance the display for the purpose of this webinar, but just note that that stuff is obviously all there for folks to take advantage of and utilize to, to help assist in good layouts for their schematics. Some basic view control that would be expected for something of this type of environment is provided to us. We also have a very important design tab where we interact with many things, not the least of which are our data tables, where we would subsequently potentially be defining groups and arrays of things like wires and structures that would be relevant to our users and that would be used, holistically inside the company. We can deal with these things in a table-based setup. You can deal with them straight away in CSV files and import them to be these tables, as opposed to dealing with it inside this environment explicitly. If you would, in fact, having math or something to create said tables or automated creation of the tables or something along those lines, or not necessarily only math, but we'll just call it Excel side functionality that you might be deploying in a CSV file to kind of augment the creation of these tables that facilitate your conductors and your items, to be frank. The lamps and things to this effect, we'll talk about this soon, but just as a quick preface, properties and stuff on items can apply data sets and refer to data tables and things to that as well. So items themselves and artifacts can be structurally driven on tables, just as the conductor example that I just showed. Getting started tab, this is very important. As I promised, I would mention where we find the catalog. And, we never go looking for the things we really want sometimes in the places that make the most sense. And I think we're all guilty of that to some degree. Getting started is actually where we find our sample catalog. And we can simply create a new design based on that sample catalog, and then all of the material would essentially be in that design that comes from that sample catalog. I'm going to abort my little demo here for this light. We're going to jump right back into it, but I'm going to open this thing up and we'll look at this catalog functionality because you can't really do both at the same time. And the catalog is thinned down for the purpose of this example that we're using today. So I'm going to abandon saving that and open this up. And we'll jump on our diagramming tab now. And it's opened up our template, and we see we have the templates coming in from our, design, if you will, that was templated by the sample catalog. We have design, sheet templates and such that we could start building artifacts with and building designs themselves. Get me back to the diagramming tab. The diagramming tab, as I mentioned, I would come back to. Here we are. The Design Explorer provides for functionality related to exploring the overarching theory of the design. This is speaking to the different sheets and such that are on the design. It is not madly uncommon that we have designs where both EE stuff, if you will, and P, I, and D, if you will, piping side things are holistically managed in a single Creo Schematics design. I would say I find that workflow to me more typical in cases where one person may be unfortunately burdened with both, duties, as they are shared only inside of the file itself. So if we have all of the design content residing inside of a single Creo Schematics design, then we can kind of only access all of the design content in that design. It's also very typical for users and companies to separate things in such a way that we have, shall we say, pipe on one side of an explicit design for that, and we have the EE stuff on another side and explicit for that. So these groups can work in those designs, or individuals or groups can work with those designs exclusive of each other. But there's nothing stopping you from handling all of it holistically inside of a single Creo Schematics design, in an overarching sense, if you will, the design file that we have open in this case, which is our sample design example that I've opened up. So just know that you have a lot of power to separate, manage, navigate, and deal with individually all of the different sheets and structures that you may deploy in a design, regardless of which side it comes from. That's speaking to design concept. The Catalog Explorer is the stuff that we get a lot of questions about, and this speaks to like all the different stuff that PTC provided as objects, like that little lamp that I deployed onto our basic demonstration schematics that I promise we will jump back into and start back on here very soon. The stuff I utilized in that design to deploy something that we could use as a very basic example all came from this catalog. And there is a handful of depth here to the catalog. Maybe it's a good thing, but I don't like having expand all function for this that would expand it and like show the total depth of what is in all folders and in all cases. But there is, quite a bit of stuff here in this catalog, both on the wiring and, if you will, piping HVAC side, etc. But this is how you would subsequently take ownership of the complete catalog that's provided by PTC. Now, what most folks do is get here and then say, okay, I'm coming with some stuff to delete here. And a lot of it would be blown out by, just environment, shall we say. If we're in an EE only environment, all of the HVAC pipe stuff, you just blow it out of the catalog. And folks continue to kind of progress down from a need and availability standpoint from this default PTC catalog into what they need and utilize with Creo Schematics. And, it continues to be filtered down. But it makes, arguably, I think, in the most professional sense, to just go dump it and get everything when you're starting into these things. If you haven't already deployed or have never, had any utilization for the PTC catalog stuff, I encourage you to, go dump into this catalog, take a look and see what's there. If this is something new to you, and see if there is something there that you may see value in moving forward, or if you're new getting started, this should provide for an excellent launching point for you to kind of get rolling, if you will, with what's there in the basic catalog. So that's a little bit about our Catalog Explorer. That allows us to navigate the design and select these objects regardless of what they are. Like if we go into the lamps folder here, if you will, we can see here we have different lamps in here, and one of these lamps is likely to be one of the lamps I use, but this might be this is a circuit diagram folder, so this isn't really what I used in my example. But as you can see, there's a host of stuff here. It's a very deep library concept for individuals on the EE side. The folks on piping have it so much easier. Pipe schedules have been pretty consistent for quite some time now, and that definitely lends itself to some elegance, if you will, where things in the electrical space tend to be, especially in the day we live now, very volatile. So just take advantage and see what you can get in the catalog that may speak to you. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump back into the light demonstration that we just had open. So we're navigated back to this design, and let's talk a little bit about this design, and then let's, as I promised, segue off into this design, into looking at how this benefits us on the Creo Parametric side. So when we talk about these objects, I promised that we would speak to how they come to life. So they come to life in the concept that there is obviously limited parametrics in the sheet that, you know, the connectivity one would expect for manipulating an object graphically and moving it, and subsequently having our conductors update and be attached to the artifact. Of course, that's in place. And as you see, I move the object, and, you know, those things are in play. That's obviously terribly important to people that are making schematics and things to that effect. So as you would expect, the life of that thing in terms of connectivity with the conductors defined on the sheet does exist, as you would expect. Now, that exists down into a kind of a nested level, if you will, in our definition for these conductors. So when we select our stick object, if you will, because it's an artifact and not simply just like DWG stick stuff, we can go select the properties of the object here within the schematics environment. This allows us to declare very important properties that we can utilize on the Creo Parametric side to really automate some life over there, based on the investments in the workflow in schematics, the theory of digital thread. We're going to share into other parts of the product and other, you know, sections of our, you know, nodes, if you will, of our digital thread. There are important parameters to mention here: model name, number of pins, these types of things. You'll see how they come into play as we move forward in the demonstration. The thing to note is pay close attention to the name LampCon. LampCon matters. And you'll see how LampCon begins to matter as we move forward. And I'm going to clear up a question that I know everybody's going to have about the document here soon, so bear with me. So we see this set of parameters here as it speaks to LampCon. I'm going to go ahead and set the handy filter here in schematics to only allow me to select ports. And I'm going to bring up the properties for a port object. We see that the port object is specifically where our conductor is attaching on the schematic, and that's kind of a thing, and that is important on an artifact definition. We do attach conductors, to ports. Now, that being said, this port has important parametric significance as well. It's got a name entry port on it, and make note of what it's called, LP2. Okay, in this case, the layer in the sheets and some of the other things, not terribly significant, but entry port, yes, because we're going to make connections to this stuff in the realish side of it, if you will, on the Creo Parametric side. So we see here that we've got some parameters that relate to naming. Now, these things can be facilitated on the design side by utilizing your global parameters functionality here within schematics. I've accessed the design tab and global parameters, and you can facilitate setting these things up so that these important things are part of your artifacts, you know, by definition and stuff to that effect. It's not like we're expecting you to go in there and add a model name parameter every time, every day, always, every artifact. We can always automate these things that just, you know, become part of the definition for these artifacts. We can arguably further automate that process with tabular information, the data table theory that I mentioned previously that I showed on conductors as it related to using a CSV style based table and defining multiple instances of the similar object, green lights, red lights, etc., those types of things. So we see here that, you know, that's kind of what's going on. We have a little bit of parametric information that we're kind of deploying here on our schematics artifacts. So as we go about inside of schematics creating one of these designs that you see here, we are, you know, kind of filling and building that data in the background on our objects, as you see in this case. We see we have different objects here on our schematic, as I mentioned, just some very basic stuff that was thrown on here just for the purpose of connectivity, not necessarily for the purpose of speaking, you know, explicitly to a production design. Now, that being said, we're going to go ahead and select this conductor now, and we're going to look at the properties for the conductor because those are also important, very much so. So we see here that this conductor's got a few unique values hanging on it as well, not the least of which are spool name, thickness, units, and wire gauge. Also, to note, color matters. at least for the pretty stuff on the parametric side. If we want to have colors transposed from schematic to populate pretty colors on the parametric side automatically, we have to have a convention where the naming of the color here for the conductor on the schematic matches a color that exists in the user's color palette that is doing the parametric cabling operation. So a lot of people become very frustrated by wires that don't have colors. And this is always the root cause of that frustration, at least in my experience so far, as far as, what can cause these things to disconnect along the way. But make note, we've deployed some important parameters here for the conductor as well as the schematics objects themselves. Now, a day in the life of working with schematics would involve creating these types of documents. And users would be doing things to the effect of accessing their, in this case, their catalog explorer, selecting different objects from the catalog explorer. As I mentioned, in this case, it could be whatever the case may be, the indicators. So here we have the signal lamp that, I did use in this case. And we would simply instance these, place these block instances on our schematic. And of course, I can select this to deploy another signal lamp here that I could do conductor routing to, because it's just very easy to do that. And I can orient these objects on the fly, of course. So, I can say, hey, I want to turn this left or right in some way because I want to orient this thing on my schematic to facilitate how I'm going to hook it up with other conductors. And I can simply instance that object onto my schematic, and away we go. And then I can subsequently follow that up by routing fibers, between different objects, selecting different conductors. Here we would have a red, or I'll select an orange conductor in this case. And now I can conduct to valid connections within, and that's pretty close for that text. I have to move that object, if you will. I can go ahead and facilitate connecting these different things to my artifacts. And manipulating my text and things to this effect, which in this case is brutally large in this example. But that's the basics of just adding an artifact to a schematic and running a fiber conductor on it. And that can be done as a pipeline definition also on the piping side. That's kind of like the workflow of utilizing these library objects, deploying them, and getting to the point where we have the schematic created. Now, not all users will be deploying schematics into a cabling environment, but those that do benefit the cabling environment immensely. This work product that has been created here has enormous ability to be shared into the Creo cabling life of this and bring Creo cabling very much to life. To look into that and just to kind of briefly speak to that theory before we transition into a question and answer format, let's take a look at what that would look like, and we'll open up Creo Parametric very quickly. While it's not our focus in schematics today, let's take a look at what we can get that's really, kind of maybe more tangible than historically the flat paper sheet theory that we're kind of looking at right now. With that being said, we would go about this process by exporting our XML, which is the export format that PTC is utilizing between schematics and Creo cabling. So we would simply come here to export, say we want to export some XML. We have some cool functionality to validate that we're going to get the right thing headed to the right place. So like if we're going to send this to cabling, we want to validate it for cabling, so we select our target application to be cabling. Typically, the best luck I ever have is exporting single sheets at a time. It becomes daunting for users to deal with implications of logical data in a multi-sheet layered export inside of the parametric world, because now when we transition into the parametric world, we forego the elegance of our design explorer here inside of schematics. The parametric world has like one 3D assembly that everybody's building stuff onto. We don't really like have a design sheet explicit to a specific harness or a specific part of schematics context design. So in order to not, be daunting so much, In cases when applicable, obviously, for the Creo Parametric side users, it's very advisable to go ahead and say current sheet when you do your exports, because they lack the elegance of the Design Explorer to separate and organize the context of this logical data that is coming from schematics. We would subsequently do a validation on my XML, and of course, it's subsequently nagging me about my 4 unconnected ports on my, my representative power supply object here, if you will. So it detects these things, but none of the stuff that's listed is coming across as being a deal breaker. So we're fine. We can proceed. Everything's all good. You would be duly informed in this message window if things were going to go sideways. So we would go ahead and say close, and we would go ahead and we'd have our file selected, and we would say okay, and that would export this to an XML file. Now, what do we do with that XML file in the concept of digital thread and speaking to, sharing and working within different nodes of the thread or different parts within the same ring of the thread, if you will? However, how can we better share this information that has been created inside of schematics? So we exported our XML. So now we're going to fire up Creo Parametric, and we're going to go ahead and see how this comes to life inside of Creo Parametric. And this is where it's kind of neat. A lot of schematics users I can truly sympathize with at this time, because the elegance that this provides, your work creates an enormous amount of downstream automation. And sometimes it would be nice if somebody was above us to create those levels of automation. And the EE group residing so far upstream and front side, and the same can be said for HAVAC definitions on schematic, that it often becomes a thing where it's not, they lack availability of previous information to benefit from, unfortunately. And the relationship of schematics to Creo cabling is that. Cabling benefits, as you'll see, enormously from Creo schematics, but unfortunately there isn't much above the ecosystem in Creo schematics that can push into schematics, and I can't give you things back in schematics from Creo cabling. This is a very one-way street. The folks in schematics get to share it to cabling. The folks in cabling do not have any pathway effectively outside of, homegrown toolkit application type stuff, do not have a pathway to get data back to schematics. That pathway is theoretically possible. And to speak to that, some of PTC's most recent advancements in schematics are speaking to the schematic side API to enhance the API and the ability to facilitate people automating schematics and doing those types of things, utilizing Toolkit or Java, a combination thereof, in-house techniques, whatever the case may be. So with that, let's go ahead and get this example of the light demo that I just had on screen. Let's go ahead and get that up here on the screen into Creo, so we can have a look at how this would play into the Creo parametric side. So in a 3D parametric space sense, to be as simple as humanly possible, this is representative of what we'll talk about today. So we have our basic objects that you may have been expecting from our schematic. We have some generic, poorly representative power supply, at least on the schematic side, and arguably here on the 3D side too. But nonetheless, the definition matters more than the physical modeling. We have an enclosure for the object. We have a switch, a light object. We have a stuff part. Everybody has a stuff part in any 3D routing reality, and the stuff part represents the thing that will have 100% probability of interfering with your fully automatic wire routing on the face of it. We have ways to facilitate dealing with this. We do that through networking and things to that effect here inside the Creo cabling interface. I'm not going to speak to networking and some of the big complexities and things to that effect, or not big complexities, but deeper complexities, if you will, speaking explicitly to the cabling side today, because our focus is schematics. But just know that we do have ways to make the wires automatically really go where they need to go, instead of the example I have today, which will show you that yes, there are while this does fully automate it, there are caveats. It doesn't know what path to take in 3D because that information can't be given with regardless of best of intentions from our schematics group folks. The best of intentions can't pass that information through the digital thread to the 3D space. So there's always going to be stuff in the way when it comes time to route things in 3D. So you'll see that behavior and that reality today, and you'll see Sean do a quick workaround for it. So here we are inside of this. This represents a basic PTC theory of textbook cabling deployment in terms of assembly structure. I'm not going to get down into that too madly today, but just know this is their textbook way that an assembly structure might look that deploys cabling in some form, and it subsequently, sets us up to work in this cabling assembly exclusively, which is what we're going to do, because right now we just really don't need to see the top level to do what we need to do for cabling, and it's always cool if that's the case, because if we're dealing with big objects from an assembly standpoint, it's always best if people check out least in terms of wind chill PDM environments and things to that effect. So I don't have that running obviously in the background today, but we're going to go ahead and open up that cabling part of this, the cable assembly that represents enough to do these things that we need to talk about from an automating Creo Parametric standpoint from the schematic side, as I promised. First things first, Sean's got to go grab a color file because, as I mentioned previously, the whole color file disconnect thing matters. And if your colors, I have a fairly elaborate box of crayons on the side personally for design that doesn't play well with the simplistic nature of the colors that are set up for the schematics demonstration stuff here. So this is a color file that I got to load. Typically, users would just already have those colors on their color file. Unfortunately, maybe it says something about Sean that after all this time, I haven't just embedded those colors into my formal color file, so I don't have to go get that for these things. So my apologies. It's not really a part, but it is something I spoke to previously as far as that goes. So now we're going to go ahead and light up the cabling interface as far as that goes. Now, part of what we do in cabling is we go create harnesses. I'm going to speak through this process quickly because where the schematics part brings it to life is the important part, not the clicks and picks inside of cabling. So first things first, we would subsequently go ahead and create a harness that allows us to subsequently do wire routing on. And I'm just going to call it HX1 in this case. This is a PTC internally managed part that PTC does and drops the stuff in and creates all the objects on and all those things to that effect in order to facilitate cabling utilization here inside of Creo Parametric. Now, it goes without saying also, I'm doing this demonstration in the environment of an EE space, if you will. The workflows for doing this stuff on a pipe side, if you will, HAVAC, whatever, those are very similar to what are utilized here. We do end up getting questions to speak to this on the electrical side more so. Most of our demonstrations are based around the electrical side. Just know that these workflows, both on the schematic side and here on the Creo Parametric side, are emulated virtually one-to-one, with the exception of the obvious differences in pipes with valves and couplers and connectors and stuff, and things to that effect. Now, here inside of our 3D, the important thing to talk about real quick before we do the cool stuff and watch the pretty automatic routing happen is, you see here we have PSCon, SWCon, LampCon present in the model tree. The ones that I didn't put to sleep already in the webinar were remembering from our properties discussion here on the schematic side that there was a name kind of like that. And this is where the dream comes true. And I jump back to schematics to mention to a key point that we do speak to in many companies in many cases. It is not obligatory that you have a formal connector a part of your schematic definition. You can, if you so choose to. But as you're going to see in this example, I can also just declare the explicit schematic artifact thing to be what I'm hooking up with as a connector in the real world, when the connector is wanted to exist in the real world, but maybe the drama of formally artifacting the connector on the schematic is unwanted in the EE world. This all works just fine. And this is the example that I like to show because a lot of people find that to maybe be daunting, that concept of connectorizing everything on top of this to facilitate the 3D working. That's absolutely not necessary to bring this to life. So that's a little bit of that connection to come step back in time to when I was mentioning these model names and things to that effect. Most folks benefit immensely from putting connectors and things to this effect on family tables and stuff like that to facilitate that naming convention and, making sure it lines up and building out new ones and keeping, company culture and policy as it relates to naming and all of those things. Family tables are good when it comes to connectors and doing and working with a lot of that stuff. So that's just a little bit about, just some basics on the front side of this. So let's go ahead and get this stuff. We start by importing PTC Creo Schematics, and we're going to go get a whole XML. And here's my DC light demo that I've selected now, and we would otherwise go ahead and say, okay, and we say done, and we say done. Now, it brings a bunch of stuff to life on our ribbon, and the Creo Parametric engineer can now say, hey, I want to go look at my to-do list, and that's what this compare function speaks to. It says, hey, this is my to-do list. These are the things that exist on the XML DC light side, coming from the schematic here in the far right-hand column. In the adjacent left-hand column, these are the things that you've got done here inside on the 3D, which obviously is kind of a zero, not a hero, where we are right now. So it knows and it understands those things. And that data is kind of like embedded into this Creo cabling file now. So one of the things about that is we do routing in Creo cabling between, cable-defined objects, and they have to have cable parameters. So when I light up my cable parameters, we see nothing. I got no joy here. There's nothing happening. But that's where the schematic comes into play. I don't have to go manually define those parameters on those objects. I can simply say, hey, let's auto-designate this stuff. And here comes the goodies from our schematic. It's automatically matching out and finding everything here based on those names, as I mentioned in the reference model, as we see here. And I can simply say, okay, and close. And now I have cable parameters on all these objects, and I can go select one of these things I've defined as a connector here inside of this, and you're going to see that all of that cool stuff from the from the schematic side, all of that work has been utilized and propagated in here. Those entry ports, those names, that stuff, it's all here. It's all come over and it's been mapped onto this object automatically in 3D space. Why is that important? Because now the Creo cabling engineer can come in here and say, hey, I want to route some cables based on this logical data. I'm going to just go look for them because I just really don't feel like declaring all this manually right now, and it should live on my schematic. And then I'm just going to do all of it at the same time here, and I'm going to say, okay, and now this is looking really good. We've got wires, coming to life automatically here on our Creo Parametric cabling side. We say, okay, wires came with their colors. As mentioned, their 100% probability of automatically routing through the stuff did happen, as I mentioned it would. So we would have to follow up with some location manipulation. And, of course, Creo, cabling has workflows optimized to do this stuff. So, for me to come in here and start sorting out the essence of rerouting these conductors to a more appropriate scenario, because I don't have a predefined network that would have just made all this happen automatically, which is what Creo Parametric cabling users are encouraged to be doing, while EE users are deploying their world of work on the schematic. They can be doing this networking and wire routing pathway definition in advance of getting the logical data from the EE group and being able to take advantage of it. So now we've got to this place where, we're just routing wires quick and easy, and this is looking really good inside of our Creo cabling application part of the digital thread. And, we're utilizing and just taking the utmost advantage of all that stuff inside of that comes from our schematics. We come back in, we do a logical compare now on our logical data, and things are looking really good here. We see that, we've got all of these things kind of mapped out. Our to-do list is 1-to-1 across the board, and we're good to go. The schematic definition based on what we see here has been satisfied by the 3D condition now from the data that was exported into the XML. So with that being said, just to kind of touch on it, that's a little bit of utilizing more of the digital thread theory in sharing across nodes and sharing within the same digital ring, if you will, between products in the ecosystem, and as well as, saying, hey, these are the things that may be a little bit required from the schematic side to kind of start bringing some of that stuff to life, if you will. So to bring schematics back as our primary focus, because that is our primary focus today, but it's important to speak to the deliverables and the depth of the work product that can come out of schematics. So that's why, I speak to the Creo Parametric side of what's possible here. So with that being said, we're going to loop back around here onto our schematic, and we're going to transition off into a question and answer period where I'm going to encourage all of our many participants to ask questions, type them in. I'll knock them down one at a time, best of my ability. When you stump me, I'll tell you. As far as anything that comes along as such, we'll knock through any questions that come along through the chat interface while I'm knocking down the questions. If I'm not speaking to or demonstrating to a question specifically, I'm going to go ahead and dump the contact information from everybody, from all of us on the PDS Vision side to follow up with this on the screen, so people can be screenshotting that, getting that, documenting that in contact information as necessary or as wished. And then as questions come up, I'll jump off of that contact information and jump into those questions. Okay. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and bring the slide back up here that speaks to the contact information. And give me just a second to get my questions interface open and squared away, and we'll start knocking down the questions that you folks have. Okay, one of the first questions we've got in our question interface that came in is speaking to the differences between Creo 4 all the way up to Creo 8 as it relies on the schematic side. Okay, some big highlights that have happened that I'm aware of. There may be others that I haven't reached my desk in terms of knowledge. But some of the big highlights that I would speak to quickly between versions 4 and 8, there have been 3 releases through that section, are on our, the tools, data tab. I'm still catching up to that functionality myself. We have some new functionality for doing design exploration for users to be able to find different things inside the design in terms of handling, searching, and locating inside of complex designs and libraries based on, artifacts or classes or types and things, because it can be daunting to search into that depth of artifact library, as I showed, and or the depth of some of these designs. I have used arguably one of the most, if not the most, simple example of these types of things that could be created for this purpose today. All users I've interacted with deal with designs that are far more complex than my example, and thus often benefit immensely from being able to speak to navigation and searching the design to find an object on the design, because it could be strewn across multiple sheets in multiple different design documents, etc. It's a very deep nature, and the search tool has benefited people a lot to be able to kind of go ahead and get their head around being able to find what they want when they want. That's been one of our big enhancements that's occurred that I can think about, that I can speak to, between versions 4 and version 7 in terms of enhancements. And again, I'm not speaking to, because I don't have like a list of specific SPRs or bug fixes or anything to that effect that may have also been addressed along the way or anything along those lines. The bigger functionality enhancements that I'm aware of are speaking to that. Some of the biggest Creo 8 enhancements that have came on Schematics 8 speak to enhancements in the API support for Creo Schematics for those clients that are automating and we have many now, that are automating schematics into other products and other parts of their own internal digital thread. So, they may be taking schematics data and taking in schematics data from some other product in their pipeline, an ERP system, for instance. They may be requiring schematics information coming out of schematics and going back into those types of products. Creo's made some big enhancements as it relates to the API functionality that facilitates users being able to do those types of things with Creo Schematics to kind of automate it for some more of the bigger picture stuff that we have. We've had some questions about, just basic, functionality in schematics, things relating to, hey, how do I do this type of thing? Or, I would like to utilize this type of functionality, but this doesn't make sense to me. When it comes to those types of things, I'd encourage everybody to keep tabs on not only these webinars where we do what we can to show along the way some of this functionality in terms of how a few things work. Today was kind of a big picture thing, so we didn't really address a specific topic, but it's important to interact with the Boundary marketing team, PDS Vision marketing team. I'm still transitioning to our name change. My apologies. It's important to interact with these folks to, tell them what you are interested in and what's most dear to you in terms of needs for functionality or something to that effect. And those things can become webinar topics and, a focus, if you will, in a specific way moving forward. Beyond that, obviously, as I had mentioned, training, consultation, help desk, etc. Those types of things are available to you through Boundary Systems, through PDS Vision. Again, my apologies. These things are available to you through PDS Vision, and the contact channels for those things are right here. Don't hesitate to reach out, take advantage of those, whether it's looking to get training specific to schematics. There is class material, a formal schematics class that is provided by PDS Vision that can assist you. We do direct consultation for schematics clients, etc. Whatever the needs are, it may just be a simple help desk issue, whatever the case may be. These are the things that PDS Vision supports, and we would encourage you for all those things that I kind of can't, spool up in a ball of yarn in the context of our webinar today, to all of those things like that I can't speak to. I absolutely encourage everybody to utilize these channels here to kind of take advantage of that stuff, and we'll work with you to get you, whether it's training or answers or help or whatever the case may be. That is the absolute focus of the company that is PDS Vision. So again, there's a notable amount of those types of questions that have came in, and given our time scope, I wouldn't really be able to divulge into them explicitly on a one-by-one basis, if you will, in terms of functionality. But again, when they are important, and these things are, hey, we want to know specifically about using data tables in schematics. Please reach out to our marketing group, with that information. That then becomes something that turns into become the focus of these webinars and these sharing events that the company, the PDS Vision, does. So I encourage you all to participate that way moving forward. If there are things about the product that you had hoped to see or need answers for that I did not get a ton of time to speak to today. So with that, my apologies to those that have asked a specific question, as I mentioned, about some form of functionality and working with that. Many of you have asked about training and things to that effect. And again, starting with us at sales at PDS Vision, we'll get you access to the training calendar to know when things are happening and to get somebody to pay attention to your needs in terms of, what that is that you need to learn about, or what that is in the software that we need to look at or provide answers for. And again, my apologies for all those things and our time limits as such. With that, I do want to do one last call for questions, maybe specific to the basics of schematics that don't speak to a deeper workflow or something to that effect that would take me a great deal of time to elaborate on. If we have some questions about, hey, can you show me the artifacts thing again? Or I've been, trying to find a way to do, this. Is there a button I can click to get started? Anything to those, kind of questions, anything about the concepts that we spoke to today, arguably, again, most importantly, about the company that is now PDS Vision, that was formerly Boundary Systems, as well as how digital thread can benefit you or your company. Don't hesitate to ask any of those questions. We'll kind of take a last call here while I have my contact information up for everybody for questions. And if any come in from that spirit, I'd be happy to speak to them by all means. And again, I do extend my apologies to those, the many that did ask a question that had greater depth than I could get a hold of inside of a webinar. Please, by all means, ask questions. I would encourage, all the participants not to be bashful. If you want to sneak some questions in here at the end, go ahead and fire them off. I'd rather take the question, even if, I don't have the time to get into it today. These things can be tabled for follow-ups and things to that effect. And I am making note of that for those participants that did ask a question that I couldn't speak to explicitly. I will follow that up for our team to try and, create a pathway where there is a universe, we can speak to that. Okay, more questions. I got to be a pass now because, if you're typing away, go ahead and hit the enter key, and I'll take the rest of it as you type it out, whatever the case may be. I don't want to keep everybody off, beyond any more so through their lunch than I have if we don't have questions coming in. So by all means, if there's any last call for questions, go ahead and get those in. I'll go ahead and, hang on here for a minute or so here and keep my contact information open for everybody. And hopefully maybe we'll get another quick last call question or two. And if we don't, then, here in a minute or so, we'll kind of wrap the webinar up and look forward to, seeing everybody on the next one. Okay, and my apologies to anybody that might be typing a question now at this moment. We haven't taken any more in the last minute or two, so my assumption is being at this stage that folks have got the questions in that they have for today. My hope is that participants will follow up with questions in the future. As I said, my contact information is here. Don't hesitate to reach out to me. Technical questions on the schematic side, or otherwise, Creo Parametric side, whatever the case may be. I hope that we've shown you folks some of the depth of what can be done with schematics, what its basic overarching product space speaks to, some basics of how we would utilize it to create deliverables and arguably share those deliverables into the digital thread in other parts of the Creo ecosystem. With that, again, we don't have any more questions that have come in. I want to thank everybody for your participation today. It's been a pleasure to share the schematics information with everybody, and arguably a little bit of Creo cabling too on the side with everybody today. And again, I personally and everyone very much look forward to hearing from everybody in the future and seeing folks in future webinars. And as I mentioned, please don't hesitate to reach out to sales and or the marketing team at Boundary, through our website, and make specific requests about specific content for webinars and or things to that effect, and then they can kind of queue that up and kind of speak to that as those needs become frequent for everybody. So thank you very much, everyone, for your participation today. Again, it's been a pleasure to provide the Creo Schematics webinar. Look forward to seeing everyone soon on another webinar. And with that, I'm going to close out this one and wish everyone to have a great day.